You're listening to A Creative Excuse presented by Echo Amano. This episode is Adam Tendler. Adam is a New York based pianist and author and a 2019 recipient of the Lincoln Center Award for Emerging Artists. In 2019, he released his album Robert Palmer Piano Music. And if you're not a listener of avant garde piano music, it's not the Robert Palmer you're thinking of. And at the end of the episode, we'll play a track from that album. I knew Adam back when I lived in Houston, and this is the first time we've connected in a very long time. So it was really great to talk to Adam about what's life for him like these days, being in quarantine in New York City. Reminder that we've been nominated for Best Gallery in Santa Fe, and voting is open through Sunday, May 31st, and you can vote at sfreporter.com/BOSF. As you can tell, we're back to a every other week schedule. The gallery is open now, so that feels good to start getting the energy back in the space, and we're limiting attendance to 3 people at a time, so openings may be off the table for the time being, but can certainly pop in and come visit and see the work and all that. All right, well, thanks so much for listening.
Now.
Okay. That'll help me synchronize it. Cool. Yeah, I was saying that, like, with like not work for me, it's like going in at 10 o'clock, I go to 5, and not having those markers. I mean, like, every day it's like seems like I wake up, it's like, what day is it? What?
Right. And we've all become really dependent on technology in a funny way that I don't know, that's our timekeeper too. A composer friend of
Mm-hmm.
mine just said today, because again, I messed everything up today, and he said, you know what I do is I actually go to my online calendar, and then I still write everything down. Like, and he's like, I still do a whole list hour by hour, and then I put tasks on the side of what I also want to get done, but that are not regimented. But something about physically writing it down for him works. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, at first glance, that sounds a little foo-foo, and then I was like, but you know what? That actually is maybe great because um, because I was thinking about it, I'm like, all I have a very foggy idea of what Google is going to tell me I need to do today, but I
Uh-huh.
haven't actually like engaged it in a meaningful way that I know it truly. Like I haven't like gone through the practice of it where I'm
Yeah.
going to actually figure. And I thought, you know, that is actually interesting because it is even just like the day-to-day schedule, whatever, just it is sort of becomes this external thing. It's part of that cloud. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And
Yeah.
it's somewhere out there, and then I just keep checking in with it to tell me what I need to do next or what to expect next. And the funny thing is, it actually can be totally flawed. And that's what I found today is I had entered stuff in, but like I messed up something last week, for instance. I didn't make something recurring, and then suddenly I had a student calling me when I was like sound checking for a remote performance. And I was like, and I just felt terrible because this is, you know, it's a sensitive student who's actually playing like advanced music. It's not like, you know, all students are sensitive, but I think if it's like a 6 or 7 year old and they are kind of getting shuttled from thing to thing anyway, it might not be like an emotionally impactful thing. But this is like a teenager who I think is investing emotions into our
Yeah.
time and trust, and a certain amount of trust. And I just totally, to me, I felt like I really violated it. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Hi," and I was like, "Can we not do this right now?" I can't believe I'm saying this because I've never said this to a person before when we're supposed to be doing something, but
Yeah.
I can't. And I was like, "Can you do it later?" And then I could hear his mom saying, you know, "You can't." And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, she's annoyed." And then pushed it to tomorrow. Anyway, I just felt like such a bad person. And then what's wild is that then fed into like my whole juju for the performance. So now I'm like, I'm
Uh-huh.
really in a bad mood right
Oh,
now. I feel like
yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like this total criminal person. And anyway, it just all bounces around. It gets completely weird, and it just feels like one of those days. And I don't know if this is happening for you, but the days go by so fast. Like now it's
Yeah.
for here where I am, it's 5, and it's just like, what? It's like a series of mishaps happened, and now it's nighttime. Like, what happened? It doesn't feel like that's all that should have happened today,
Uh-huh.
but it is like
That's
two or three things.
that's so funny. That's so funny.
So
Yeah. I guess like I think I don't know. We're like 30 minutes outside of Santa Fe. We have a lot of space around us. So we're really fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time outdoors, um, and get out. And that's been really helpful to like just dig in the dirt and garden and but still like I mean I've actually this week I was like, man, I need to create a little bit more structure. So I started getting up a little earlier,
yeah,
and that's felt good. Going to bed a little earlier, it's like, okay, I'm gonna watch less Netflix. I want to just like kind of create just a little bit more structure because I don't know exactly when things are going to open back up here, but they're saying maybe some restrictions will be lifted on the 15th.
hmm
I don't know what that means for me. I have a little gallery on Canyon Road, and I only have two people in there at a time max usually anyway.
yeah,
So I think it'll be something that could be manageable. My wife's a body worker. She does massage. So that's a whole other area. So
yeah.
when things will be able to kind of get back into it. But yeah, it's totally been feeling really spacey and trippy. And like at first I felt like I was swimming in syrup. It's like it really had like a kind of physical sensation of being in syrup.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
I don't know. Yeah.
No, um, I'm also wondering if, well, have you gotten a sense from your community if people are, acting differently or what am I trying to say? Like, for instance, just now in New York has a way of sort of, and it's a very liberal city, and we have a way of kind of looking at the rest of the world like it's or especially looking at middle America or whatever, the people
Hmm.
who are campaigning to open everything up really judgmentally. And yet this weekend, like, we had a couple nice days, and it was like people were totally helpless against themselves, and
Yeah.
everyone was out. And I'm like, you can't judge people.
Yeah.
You can't do that, and then everybody horde onto like the green on Central Park or Christopher Street Pier, where there's just like teams of people, and I'm like, you can't do both things. You can't like criticize in a way. And that, again, we just have had a couple nice days, which we haven't had for a while. But all of the codes seem to have suddenly changed, like on a personal level, like on from just human to human. And it's almost like the city here has almost decided, like, never mind, we're done. Like, everything, we're just gonna like move on from this, even though it seems like, obviously nothing's changed in terms of like, as how government goes.
I mean, I'd imagine in terms of like, cases, you're still maybe not even at peak yet.
No,
Um, so that's pretty crazy.
no, that's the thing.
Um,
It's still like exponentially rising. And
yeah.
here in Brooklyn, there's still sirens around the clock, just all the time. Um, but that's what I think. I think we're all like, I think it just shows how vulnerable and fragile maybe everyone is, in that like the sun comes out and it's sort of like everyone forgot. You know,
Yeah.
that's just what happened here. It just maybe shows how eager we are to kind of return.
I know. I know. It's a tricky thing. I mean, New Mexico comparatively has done fairly well. The governor kind of shut things down pretty early on,
Hmm.
and it's also one of the least populous states in terms of like geography and
Right.
how many people per square mile or whatever. Um, Santa Fe has had multiple days without any new cases
Oh, interesting. Wow.
recently. Navajo Nation is being hit really hard.
Huh.
It's and part of it is they don't have the same resources.
Yeah.
So it's they're like Gallup went on a complete lockdown the other day. So like streets coming in and out totally blocked off.
Wow.
Um, so there's parts of the state that have been hit hard, but Santa Fe in general, it seems like most of the people here are very compliant
Yeah.
and uh, are really taking it seriously. So
You were
it's
meant
yeah.
Yeah, well, you were mentioning like regimenting things now, but did you find like when the lockdown first started that you were also like felt super inspired and regimented and like I'm gonna do yoga every day and all that kind of a thing?
No, no. I think at first, like the first week, I was like, okay, how am I going to keep my business going? You know.
Yeah.
But then after the first week, I was like, I'm just going to milk this. I'm just going to like totally like sink into letting go of time and regimentation and just like allowing myself the space to just like totally to unplug,
Yeah.
relatively speaking. Um, and because I was cautious of that tendency, I think, that can happen where, like, oh, I finally have all the time. Now I'm going to be super productive, which can
Right.
oftentimes, I think, be counterproductive.
Yeah.
Um, Especially now where I feel like there's this huge opportunity to, like, to really pause.
Yeah.
Um, unless this thing comes back again or we get another pandemic or something, like, we may not have this chance again
Totally.
to like really reevaluate. And I think, of course, for me personally, like reevaluate what my priorities are and how I want to spend my time. But like as a country and as a globe, like it's a huge opportunity to just like to check ourselves
Yeah.
and make shifts. Whether that happens or not is another thing, but it's an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, and I think those kind of realizations might come in waves and there will be stages of those. Like when I heard somehow, for instance, like looking forward to the summer was somehow a thing. I mean, my whole performance schedule was vaporized like almost overnight. And it was amazing how just how swiftly and easily, like in a couple emails, suddenly everything was gone, um, including just the promise of working over the summer and just like playing shows over the summer here, there, everywhere. So part of me was really excited for just like summery type things like, well, maybe I can still go to the beach. Like I just started thinking that way. I don't know. And so, then when word came that the beaches were going to be shut down, I took it like for a minute, like really personally. I'm like, oh, you know, really that too? Like we can't. And then but it took a little bit for me to be like, oh my gosh, well, imagine like next year how healthy the beach is going to be, or like imagine like how grateful this beach is going to be that for like a
Yeah.
year all of New York City beaches are going to have like, people are probably going to still go and violate rules or whatever, but like let's just say like 95% of who was going to be there was not going to be there. Like think of how grateful that water might be and like
Mm-hmm.
what is in that water, and it's like you're saying, like that doesn't happen, that kind of pause or that sort of reset. We don't really allow our resources to have that kind of breather. And
Yeah.
so when I moved past my selfishness, I was able to sort of recognize that. And I think on a personal level, that keeps happening too, because there will be moments of like, self pity or not, in a less negative term, just like total paralyzing doubt of like, I don't know where does this go? I don't know where it leads. It can feel like, again, I can get really kind of irrationally, um, angry about it. And I can find myself again, like sort of aligning with socio, like demographically, I'm trained or sort of socialized to think I'm not aligning with, like the people chanting to opening things up. I don't want to be aligning myself
Mm-hmm.
with that mentality, and that when I will see like things getting canceled for performers, or artistic institutions canceling things in like September and October, my knee jerk is actually that, where I'm like, really? Like, it
Mm-hmm.
this is like a forest fire. It's like devouring things. Like, do we even really know, like, in September and October, that people are going to be safer if you're shutting that thing down? Like, so I can find myself having these waves of rational or irrational reactions to things, and then I have to just like chill.
Yeah.
Um, and that, yeah. So anyway, that happens for me too, where I'll think, well, this is over. Like, my life in music, with everything I was trying to do,
Mm.
it's done. Or I'll think it's at least been like kicked back 5 to 7 years. So uh, I have to soul search and think, am I okay with that? and and sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not. But it sometimes it just takes moving through that fear, or that regret, or whatever, anger, to be like, or this is a moment to take pause, or this is a moment to reconnect with like the big why. Like, why was I doing this?
Yeah.
Was it for career and status, or to get ahead, be recognized, or was it like to connect with music, or to
Yeah.
share music? Um, and this moment is an opportunity to sort of just have to keep coming back to that. It's almost like a vinyasa. It's like a it's like a sun salutation. You have to
Mm-hmm.
just keep coming back to that flow of like, all right, well, I know I was feeling that thing, but what brought me to art and music in the first place? Like, can I return, like, return to the breath? Can I return to that,
Yeah.
and like get through this day with that as the focus, as opposed to what I might have lost, and if that's okay, and blah blah blah. So
That's actually a great segue to kind of talk about how you got into music. So where did you grew up in
I
Illinois?
grew up in Vermont.
Vermont. Okay. You went to school in Illinois.
I went to school in Indiana.
Indiana. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I
So you
went to
grew up in
school in
Vermont.
I
Was
grew up in
music in the house?
sort of. My grandfather taught piano when he emigrated to like New York City. He was already, I guess, pretty semi self-taught pianist from what I've been told. And so he had a teaching studio here in New York City, actually, and taught my mom and taught my two older sisters.
Where did he move from?
But Turkey,
Turkey.
that side of my family is Armenian, but they lived in Turkey and escaped, when things were getting really bad for, Armenians in Turkey, but somehow
Mm-hmm.
got here. Um, my mom and my dad's not Armenian, but they hooked up again, sort of here in Brooklyn, Long Island ish, and around Vietnam. There's a reason for all this, but went up to Vermont to be on a dairy farm to get like an agricultural exemption for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
That's how they ended up in Vermont. And my grandfather followed them to Vermont, my grandfather on my mom's side. And so then he was teaching piano in my hometown. Um, all that to say that there was classical music in my house, but I never
Uh-huh.
took from him. He was really strict and really like a kind of unforgiving teacher. Um, and my sisters and my mom all, in relative terms, pretty much quit after at a certain point. And so
Uh-huh.
my mom, and I think it's a really pretty brave move, um, had me study with someone else, basically his
Um,
competition in town, who was a
wow.
really like gentle and liberal in his way of just letting students kind of guide things. And so I took from him, and it was always like a tense thing. So that's how I got into it. And um, still, it took me a little while to take to it, take to
Mm-hmm.
classical music. I think I wanted to do maybe more theatrical things or
Mm-hmm.
something, but I was really fascinated by movies and like that kind of performance, and writing and storytelling and stuff like that. And music was something that I would practice. And looking back at old videos and stuff, I think I was better than I remember, than my narrative says. In my
Mm.
narrative, I really like sucked, and then suddenly was good when I decided to get good at it. When I look back And that as a teacher now, I actually see that I was probably more promising than I allow myself to think. But I never took it very seriously. And it was sort of in high school, um, when I think I just needed some direction, and I needed sort of a safe haven from sort of bullying. I just saw community in music
Hmm.
already in high school, and I was actually looking at like upperclassmen, and it was weirdly like very calculated. It wasn't super accidental. I was seeing the kind of extracurricular lives that um, upperclassmen were having at my
Hmm.
school, and it looked really fun, and it looked like, oh, like that's cool that they're doing that. And then I sort of took stock of my materials, and I thought, oh well, I've been playing piano my whole life. I think I can actually like do the thing that everyone's been telling me to do, which is take it seriously, and I might actually have a shot at this. I was so naive. There's not like a huge classical music culture in Vermont, at least in terms of training.
Hmm.
So I was naive enough to think like, oh, this is not like super competitive, which is like
Hmm.
like a joke to say. Um, but I was like, I'll just do that, and like almost like overnight, I just thought, okay, I'm going to create an audition program and I'm going to go to music school. And it just became a very obsessive, concerted effort.
Hmm.
Um,
So
and
was
then
there
I
like an
got
orchestra in high school or?
there was a band in high school, but there
Band?
was a youth orchestra in my state. And
Hmm.
what's funny is they actually already had a pianist, so I was in the percussion section for that.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I just dove in. I mean, so it's none of it was superficial because I was like genuinely interested and
Hmm.
genuinely wanted to learn as much as possible. So I would like in my high school there was a room in the library that just had nothing but records in it, and I don't know where they came from, but I would just go there if I could get out of class or if I just whatever, and I just stayed in there and I listened to every record, and a lot of that stuff really is still, I think, the foundation of my interests in music. There was so much American music there, and there was all this world music there, and uh, so yeah, I just became like this really hungry student of everything. And then, I mean, the long story short is I had a run of auditions, kind of didn't get accepted into anywhere. Again, it shows sort of how naive I was. Is I just get shot for all the top tier schools and then didn't get into any of them.
Hmm.
I was like, shit, I don't know what to do now. I really didn't have a backup. And one school like basically lost my application, and that was Indiana. And I was
Uh-huh.
like, and I contacted them. I'm like, I never heard back from you. I don't. Did you get my tape? Did you blah blah blah?
Uh-huh.
It was the only place I sent a tape to as well.
Hmm.
And then like, oh my gosh, we're so mortified we missed it. And can you come out for a special audition? By then, the whole season was over. Everyone had their results, including me, and all of mine were negative. And I went out and had a special audition for the chair of the department, and it went, of course, like terribly. Also, um, and but he was like, I think I see potential. And so then when I actually got into music school, and then I saw that as like the biggest gift, like divine gift ever. It it's a blessing and a curse because I always felt like I sort of eked in, like I
Hmm.
kind of just squeezed by some bizarre fluke. And so if there was ever a sense of catch up and I'm, imposter like phenomena, or even in Vermont, I was like, it's easy to feel like I was very aware that it's easy to feel like a big fish in Vermont in classical music. Even in high school, I knew that, and I was like seeking uh, teachers. Like I had multiple teachers, so I was really being very practical about trying to have us fleshed out. I just was a nervous performer, like a really
Hmm.
nervous performance. My
Hmm.
auditions were it's like probably one of the things I lacked. Um, anyway, getting into the school and that kind of in my mind, my narrative fluke, it made it so that when I got there, I became that much more sort of obsessive about
Hmm.
like doubling down. No one can know my secret, like that.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I also had the secret of being gay, which I wasn't even like
Hmm.
making peace with yet. And that's part of also that escape in high school of being able to just like shut myself in a room and not either be bullied or not have to engage this thing that was a presence in my life, which was having to either always say no to people, like, no, I'm not, or like run away from people who were like an actual threat to my safety. Music was really like a very practical escape and like a cocoon. And
Did you find like community within that though? I mean, it sounds like that was part of the drive. You mentioned
um,
community, but maybe it was more escape than community.
it was more escape. I think the community I wanted was like a kind of camaraderie and a
Mm-hmm.
musical like family.
Mm-hmm.
It was less about being around queer people,
Mm-hmm.
actually. I think I wasn't really even at peace with myself. When I look back at my behaviors and the things I did all the way up until when I actually came out, which is way after my 50 state tour that I wrote the book about, I was a very gay person. And it's kind of stunning to me when I look back and I'm like, what was I telling myself? Like,
Mm.
what was I rationalizing? But at the time, I think I just wanted a sense of belonging to anybody. And there also wasn't a ton of queer people I knew. So they, like I'm putting they in air quotes, but they, as in gay people, remained something of like a fascinating other, even to me.
Mm.
Like I admired these people when I would encounter them, again in air quotes, but it was sort of like still something I couldn't quite engage or
Yeah.
like, um, yeah. But yeah, so in music school, I still sort of cocooned and doubled down and was I had friends, but I look back at that time as a very antisocial time. At the same time, I like so much more of what I learned and so much more of what still fascinates me now as a musician now. I, researched in that library or I like leafed through in the archives there. I listened to in their sort of rudimentary online audio resources. It's like before Spotify and before YouTube and all that stuff. And uh, so I owe a ton to it, but it's always like there's two sides to everything. So
Yeah.
I still like coming out of school, I still struggled with, feeling like I belonged or feeling like I deserved to be there or that it was all just sort of like a big fluke.
Right. Right.
I mean, I haven't conquered that, but I've gotten better at it.
Sorry, my cat wants to get out of the room here. One second.
Cute.
Go on.
What's the cat's name?
I've got two. That one was Luna Boots, and the other one's Aurora. Um,
Cute.
yeah, and yeah, that's a trip. I mean, because I felt like music. I played drums in kind of middle school and high school, mostly like rock, like played in like punk rock bands and things like that.
Hmm.
And I mean, that was definitely for me a way to find community because I definitely felt like an outcast. I didn't really fit in with. Is definitely not the popular kids, but you know, it's pretty dorky and just like, you know, wasn't into sports and
Right.
grew my hair long and you know that kind of stuff. So it's
Yeah,
like,
of
okay,
course.
yeah, punk rock was like my scene, you know. But that was definitely a way for me to like meet people that felt like outcasts too, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. I mean, it was pretty amazing to actually meet people who were also interested in what I was interested in. I still actually have that experience to this day when I meet people who can still geek out on the stuff that fascinated me then and still does now. But
yeah,
yeah, that's how I got into it though. It was a musical house, but I'm happy. I'm actually grateful that I had sort of the room to sort of carve my own little place to fall in love with it like on my own. No one ever told me that I was supposed to.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and somehow over time, I just really got sucked into it, and I loved it, and I still love it. Like I don't know. It's just it's a funny thing. I just enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's still not something I'm obsessed with. It's just like I love it like I loved it in high school. Like I'm drawn to it because I think it's cool. And me playing a show now or playing music now in a concert, it's still the same impulse to be like, oh, this is cool. I'd love to show this to someone else. I'd love for someone else to know that this thing is interesting, because I think it's interesting. And that's why those lines between like serious art and what's difficult and what's easy to listen to and what's dissonant and what's abstract and is the audience ready or are they learned enough? I really don't engage that conversation very positively. Because just my experience has been if people can see my investment and they see that I'm just a person who likes it, like they can trust me, and they can trust that I'm aware of that. I know what this thing sounds like. I know if something's pretty and sounds like a rainbow, and if it's not and it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
an atom bomb. Like I know that. I know it. It's fine. I'm not going to tell you that this thing is pretty if I know it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like it's almost like irrelevant. Like what's more relevant to me is my investment in it. And I think if people see that, they can think, okay, well, I can take a chance on this piece because he invested and took a chance on it too. And then it becomes just like we share a thing,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, did you read the program notes? Here's why this is so great. Like blah 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 blah. Um,
But you're
that
also, I mean, you're at a place in your career where the audience is kind of self-selecting to a degree, right? Where like, you're not gonna unless somebody just invites somebody to, hey, come with me to this thing, and they have no idea what they're getting themselves into. Like, do you think you're surprising a lot of people?
that's an interesting point. You know, I take that point. At the same time, like what's I think one of the reasons I actually continue to do it and that and especially during times like these, as the commercials say, in these uncertain times, like why I actually am still compelled to think like, oh, there's still more to do, is that even in those crowds of like self-select of like that's a great term of like a self-selected audience, people will still think they know what's up with a certain piece or with a certain composer. And nothing delights me more when they're surprised and they're like, "Oh, I had no idea that that thing sounded like that," or that. Even if it's a piece they know, like, "Oh wow, I never heard it like that,"
Yeah.
or and that to me can be really interesting. Like for instance, I play a lot of John Cage, like um, so many people will might come to a show and they think they know what John Cage is about because they've heard about the silent piece, or they've heard about prepared piano, or they've heard about chance operation. But um, even those people who know about John Cage, I just find inevitably that there's a sense of surprise and discovery after I play it, and I'm like, oh wow, that's so great. Like I didn't. Even sometimes I'll think I'm playing a really, even as John Cage goes, like a really straight ahead John Cage program where it's all like, the prettiest hits of his music, and I'll think, oh Adam, like this is a pretty like not challenging program, and I've done that where afterward people are totally blown away. It's not like because I'm so great, but it's because they just didn't think that his music behaved that way
Yeah.
or that it could make them feel a certain way. And I'm thinking, oh wow, like that's amazing. I didn't think that there's still room for that. And the truth is
Yeah.
there's room for that all the time. I was listening the other day to a new recording of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is like the most iconic da 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 da. We've all heard that since we were like, toddlers, just on a commercial or
Looney
whatever.
Tunes.
Yeah, and I heard it the other day, and it was like the most amazing performance. And I'm like, whoa, I've never heard this piece like this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it was shocking and scary, and it was like so like riding a roller coaster. I thought, oh, maybe that's how it goes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I
so
had no
there's,
idea who Robert Palmer, the composer, was until like a week
oh
ago.
yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean, you wouldn't.
totally
Look, when I saw that you did an album by Robert Palmer, I was like, "What?"
addicted to love. I
I'm
know.
sure you get that, but like,
No,
so
totally.
yeah, but so I mean, that was a totally new discovery for me, and I loved the recording.
Oh,
You
I'm so
know,
glad.
yeah,
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And but that discovery was that album. And that whole project was because I didn't really know either. I knew of one piece by this composer, Robert Palmer, growing up. I thought it was cool, hunted down the score, and then I would play it occasionally. And then people were asking me, "Who is this dude? Who's Robert Palmer?" And I had nothing to tell them. And so then I started to dig, and then I just kept finding like piece after piece that was cool, like really great. And I realized that like virtually none of it had been like properly recorded. And I was like, oh, maybe that's gonna happen. And so yeah, but that's the thing is like it's happening for me all the time, even when I'm like the ambassador. It still is
Hmm.
rooted in like discovery. And I mean the projects that I'm interested in the most, um, and I'm finding that even right now in lockdown, the
Hmm.
things I'm doing are stuff that feel super unfamiliar. And I've been playing like a lot of like the stuff I was raised hearing, like Chopin and Schumann and Brahms and Schubert and Bach and all that stuff, which I was raised knowing, but I haven't played, and I certainly haven't performed like in a long time, and it's been really humbling, but nice to go back to it and be like, okay, well, let's like spend time in this place and just see what's happening here.
Yeah.
But as I say that though, and this is like maybe something that you experienced when lockdown first started, that comes in waves too, where suddenly like that freedom can feel like really oppressive. It's like, well, there's so much to do, there's so much to
Mm.
practice, there's so
Mm.
much to like discover, and it can get to be like a lot. And I feel super lucky because week after week, somehow over this lockdown, I've had all these random like just projects sort of just crop up, and I've just been grabbing, I just like to say yes right now, and maybe that's just part of a need to feel relevant and alive, and remind other people that I'm relevant and alive. Relevant meaning like in a very general sense, like being meaning I'm
Yeah.
around.
Yeah.
um, so maybe part of it is that, but it's also been interesting because those projects have also interrupted that sort of more meditative, like I'm just gonna practice this stuff that has no destination, and then suddenly there will be like a really goal oriented like thing that needs to happen,
Mm.
and suddenly that's like what I do for the 4 days or 5 days.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's been a real ebb and flow, and I'm just coming out of one of those like right now, and so once again I'm returning to like, okay, now I'm back to doing whatever I want, and that feels both nice but also weird, and it's all confusing and a little strange. It's going to be weird once this all ends because I don't know. None of us know in classical music what our concerts are going to look like.
Yeah.
Like we don't know who we're going to be playing, if we're going to be playing for rooms where people are spaced out, like physically, and um, like the rest of it's going to be live cast. We don't know, what does that mean? Are we getting a door split of 10 people? Like, what does that mean? We
Yeah.
want to support the people who are the platforms who are supporting us, those who survive, which not a lot of them might. It's interesting. Like, I was watching a thing last night. I don't know what it was. Anyway, but yeah, it was talking about who is really doing well right now in this situation, and it was talking from more of like a retail sense, and it was
Hmm.
showing like Walmart, Target, Amazon, and it was showing them, and they're basically saying like, all right, well, these are going to do fine, like they are going to survive, and there's going to be like things that don't survive, and this weirdly the same goes. It could be true also in the arts. It's like a lot of the venues that we, independent artists like me especially, were relying on
Yeah.
just might not survive. And what does that mean? At the same time, and then I'll shut up, but at the same time, like cockroaches like me who have sort of like survived anyway, like I keep make my comparison as like, you know, recitals in like health food stores and
Uh-huh.
like and, you know, like mystical stationary outposts, but like that's, and I keep thinking like that's my venue now for the next 5 years is like
Uh-huh.
health food stores. And but on the, again, if I want to get mad about that, I can.
Mm-hmm.
That's an option. And there's days where I was like, well, this has kicked me back to my health food recital days. Poor health food
Uh-huh.
stores. But then at the same time, I could also flip that, and I've gotten better over the last couple of weeks at flipping that and being like, well, I know how to do that.
Yeah.
Like I've actually done that already. Like playing scrappy shows in bizarre places and playing what I want to play is what I've been doing for 15, 20 years. It's actually literally
And
what's
it's
been
really
happening.
beautiful. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
And
like I think that that kind of experience where I think can really bring you back into that initial impulse of like just creativity and joy, you
absolutely.
know.
And in a way, it's that's where being too big to fail can also be like the fact that I have the freedom that a place like Lincoln Center or someone who can only get a gig through their manager with like exclusive contracts at, you know, as classical music terms, the Walmarts and the Amazons and that's all very complicated right now because those places were supposed to have shows booked like multiple shows a night for the last 2 months and the following 6 months, and none of them exist anymore.
Yeah.
So again, on my bad days, I can get really mad because I can think, well, I was supposed to have something there, or like I was just about to penetrate that venue, and now I'll never play there for 10 years. I've had that moment where I get really dark about it, and I think, like, again, like,
Yeah.
is it okay to have that, or flip it and be like, oh, thank God I'm not like even dependent on that, and that like I can just
Sure.
slide in under like that door closed, and I've become adept over the years of sliding under that door like a little cockroach, and
Yeah.
that's cool. Like, and that's never like not been enough. Like that's actually been okay,
Hmm.
and that's a skill that independent artists just develop by default.
And
And
we
so
just
there's a
don't
part of me,
know.
yeah,
We
yeah,
just don't know anything. Like
totally,
how this is all going to shake out. Like transformation from this is guaranteed, but what that
totally,
looks like, it's going to be a
absolutely,
big fucking surprise.
yeah,
Like I think none of us have any idea how the ramifications of this past couple months, what it's going to do to society.
yeah,
And I'm sure there'll be some really beautiful things, and there'll be some things that'll be like, man, that's fucked up. But
yeah,
but yeah, transformation. Everything's going to shift. It already has, and
right.
it'll keep shifting. And I feel optimistic. There's going to be a lot of really positive things that come from it, but I just don't know what those are going to be.
Yeah,
You know.
I know, and I hope part of it is actually realizing how much we all depended on each other and how much we all really
Yeah.
enjoyed each other. I feel like I've in my day to day, again on my in my sort of more irritable moments, and I'm thinking like I'm cooped up and I'm this that. Um, I've been realizing how much before all of this I was getting sort of nourished on a sort of independent level, feeling independent or feeling mature or feeling like a grown up. So much of that just came from like the minutia of life. Like for us here, it's like getting on the subway, like walking to the subway station and getting on the train and getting out and buying myself lunch, like getting a burrito, like all those things where no one was watching and I wasn't performing for anybody, but I was actually like engaging strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, thank you for my burrito. I don't need a utensils. Like all of those like
Mm-hmm.
micro exchanges, or going to the gym and I don't know anyone's name there, but I know that person stands there and I know that person swipes my card. That to have all of that also kind of vaporize, I'm realizing how much like not I how much I miss those people who I don't even know, but also how much that fed my sense of self.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm grateful again. It's I'm trying always to shift into being grateful. I'm grateful that I'm here with my husband, and I try to like veer into that when I'm starting to feel like, oh my God, you're still here. Poor him. He's like lives here. But that's the thing. Like you can go one or the other. You can be like,
Yeah,
oh my God,
sure.
thank God you're here. Like
Yeah,
that's so
yeah,
great. As opposed
yeah.
to like, take a
Because
walk.
you could be solo. There's a lot of people that are home solo. Yeah,
Yeah, and the thing is, and it's probably a back and forth for them too, where
yeah,
they're like
sure.
might be feeling incredibly lonely, and that other days like, oh my God, thank God I only have
Yeah,
myself to be taking
right,
account of
right.
right now. And so um, that's the kind of sort of transformation and awakening that I think we're all wrestling with.
Yeah,
And I do think also transitioning back into regular life or whatever that is, it's I think it's going to be a transition. I don't know. We started with me talking about how weird it was to see how vulnerable this city was when we had a nice day. I mean, it really has been miserable, like weather that fits the situation, like
mm-hmm.
rainy and cloudy every day and freezing for like what feels like months. And then so we had this nice day, and suddenly it really did feel like a switch came off, and suddenly everyone was out as if nothing ever happened, which was bizarre to see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know. We don't even know if the transition is going to be gradual or if it's going to be just like waking up to be
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that happened.
I think the gratitude piece is something that I think a lot of people are recognizing, which of course, when things get taken away that we might have taken for granted, it's like, oh, whoa, that was really important. I really enjoyed that, or I really loved being with that person.
Yeah,
Um, and also, we tend to forget too. It's like I think that for me, the the practice is going to be to remember this time, is going to be like, oh, this could be taken away anytime. and
absolutely.
and to be honest, like I try to, before this, and just in life, I try to remember that as often as possible. That whole memento mori idea of just like, this too shall pass. I'm going to die
Yeah,
one day. And when I remember that, it just makes the moment more precious. Um, and I tend to feel more gratitude for the little things.
yeah.
So I think the trick is always remembrance. At first, we'll probably feel like, oh, I'll never forget. I'm grateful for everything, but then we'll take it for granted again.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
I think I don't know, once it's over, I think we'll all there's going to be a nostalgia for how surreal it was, and that
mm,
just happens actually. I think in all sorts of sense. It's not to romanticize trauma, but it does happen.
hmm,
Um, there's a rush to it. There's a certain community. There is a sense of community right now, even when we're all distant. There's a sense of like we're together. In New York, whenever there's like a giant blizzard, I love those nights when there's been a couple times since I've lived here where the blizzards are going to be so bad where they've shut the subways down and they've said, okay, at 6 p.m. subways are shut down. And I've loved those nights because it sort of like equalized the city. Like
yeah,
everyone had to like play by the same rules. And there were moments of this where I thought this is like that blizzard type thing where we're all and it was interesting because it ramped up really fast here in terms of the rules
yeah.
of it. But
But
there was a
globally,
sense of, oh,
right?
totally, yeah,
And now it's
right.
like everybody's dealing with this in some way. It's
It's
pretty
it's
incredible.
it's remarkable, yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah. But I do think there will be a sense once it's over, and I just think that happens in times of even grief, where there's a certain kind of like you think back to that time when the family was all together, and it was a sad experience, but you were together, and
Hmm.
I think that this will be there will be overtones of that here too. That said, and I think artists will be listening to this, and we're both artists and around artists. It's just it's a funny chemistry of even that. Like my husband draws, he illustrates, and I. there's been times where he's confessed he has felt like he hasn't spent his time like optimally. He's working remotely too, and
Mm-hmm.
he sees I'm constantly doing something. And he said something really interesting the other day where he said, "Well, if this was to end like this week, I'd be really mad at myself." I was like, it just was an interesting thing to hear because I think we're also constantly monitoring. Uh, and I think what he meant was like, I didn't do everything I could have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's sweet. I also think that that's something that we all are wrestling with all the time. And especially when this first started, and the only way we can interface right now is for the most part like digitally. And so much of that is also just seeing the avatars of people who are like, I did yoga 10 days in a row. And it's like, okay, we're only seeing that avatar of people at their most productive producing. And it's, you know,
Most
we're
people
not
don't tweet when they say, "Oh, I ate like a giant bag of chips and queso tonight, sitting on the couch,
totally.
watching Sex in the City or something."
Right. I didn't think I even liked Twinkies. I ate the whole box. No, but yeah, so that's the thing is like we're also engaging an like a digital interface where we're catching people at their most optimal a lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
or shutting out people when they're not being that, and that's a real bummer. And so it's just like it's hard to trust that. And um, at the same time, I think we're constantly monitoring ourselves, and as artists, we're so often on our own schedule and so often monitoring and yeah, our own discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And so when suddenly you're handed like a chunk of time, or you're, it's like a careful what you wish for scenario. It's like, hey, you wanted all this time, like
Mm-hmm.
here, or you wanted all this unstructured, blah blah blah. And I think that's sort of part of the awakening of a lot of this is realizing like, oh, I really wanted unstructured, like big chunk of time. Actually, maybe what I really need is structure. Like that's an interesting awakening, even like in terms of nitty gritty stuff, like and political stuff. Like I keep thinking about how certain people who might have thought that socialism was the devil are like, if they'll allow themselves, be really grateful for the fact that like socialism will put money literally into the bank account like magic.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that, people who thought, you know, I mean, no one loves obscene wealth, but there's there is a wealth class or whatever, and especially in my circle, there's been sort of a blanket demonizing of these people. And the truth is, when this, as we kind of go deeper and deeper into this, those might be a lot of the people who help. We're talking about who survives and who doesn't in terms of institutions. Like those institutions can't just rely on the government, especially our government, to help them. And so it gets complicated. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's all these sort of like micro awakenings of like, oh my gosh, like, am I having to like be grateful to that millionaire? Like that's so weird, but maybe I need to like make room for that. And then just like someone else might be like, "Oh wow, like that big government that I thought was evil just like made it so that I could put groceries on this table." And so
Yeah.
it's just like
Nuance is
happening
really
everywhere.
important. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like we've gotten, it's so easy, and, it sounds kind of cliche, but it's really not, with social media to present one particular, like you were saying, point of view of oneself, let alone an institution, a government, a rich person. Like you're presenting a kind of almost like monolithic
Hmm.
personality. Like there's this personality, and this is what it is. These are the five things that describe them, and that's what they are. and
Right.
and it becomes, I think, a lot easier to box things in, um, through those kinds of channels. Politically, things have become super polarized, so it's a lot easier to kind of say these are the things that this thing is. um, it's all of a sudden, everything, and I can't name something that he said that I like, but everything Trump says is bad, and everything Obama says is
Yeah, totally.
good, and like, I mean,
Right.
there's no room for nuance.
Right.
And when we're all kind of in a similar sorts of situation, maybe it's easier to just cut each other slack and be like,
Yeah.
look, I mean, we're all human, and we all have to face this thing. And like, there's more. to us than even what we present outwardly as our personality, especially. It's like even
Right.
that asshole that's just like, whatever, they said something rude to you. Like maybe he cries himself to sleep at night. I don't know. But like
Totally.
it's like we're very complicated beings.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
that's hard to remember sometimes.
Yeah. I'm having to sort of, yeah, it's all very nuanced. I've been surprising even myself with I don't know, the things, the space I'm making for stuff. My family can be sort of at times like religious in a way, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really particularly religious. I was raised like in a sort of vaguely Christian house. I have two older sisters. My middle sister's probably the most religious. Um, and we all went to like we were like a church going family for like holidays. We were like the family that probably most churchgoers really don't particularly enjoy because we show up on Easter and Christmas
Uh-huh.
Eve and light the candle and then but that middle sister has been more churchy, which for me has been complicated over the years because of course like there's like I don't know. It's easy also to be polarized and to vilify churches when you see like very homophobic things presented from
Yeah.
church.
And there's
Yeah,
different flavors of churches too.
of course, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I just bring that up because like yesterday I listened to two church services, like one from
Wow.
like
Uh-huh.
my sister. And what was funny is one is from the wife of a friend of mine who is in the group So Percussion, and I've just like weirdly just been like listening to her sermons, um, of like when they happen because I think I'm interested to hear what's going on with them. And then the other is the service that my sister listens to. And what was funny is I turned it on yesterday, the latter one, and she actually texted me while it was happening and was like, "You should listen to this. Like, this was really nice today." And I was like, "I am right now." The whole thing was so bizarre to me because it's like really don't feel like that's who I am. But again,
Yeah.
it's just it's been a funny experience of
Yeah.
just getting kind of I don't know tossed to and fro from all these different places and talking about nuance also that when this first happened and I think I was feeling a little more angry or and a little more victimized or whatever. It was very easy for me then to say, okay, there's a them and an us in terms of artists and musicians. And before I was called, you know, I called myself a cockroach earlier in this podcast, and I'll continue that metaphor, I guess. But I thought, okay, there's the people who have sort of a system, or there's a structure that is protecting them, and there is mechanisms that will ensure that the thing that was canceled will happen again, or they're well known enough from the public that they will survive this fire, you know, and there will be a demand. And I was thinking, and then there's the cockroaches like me who just got stomped on. And that was where I was for a little while. I was really not happy about it. And what was interesting over the next, week or two was actually interfacing. These people are my friends, and that's also something that I've struggled with because here I am like feeling jealous and envious and hostile actually toward like my actual friends, like some of my closest friends
Mm,
actually.
mm,
And I was trying to wrestle with these really kind of unhealthy feelings. What was helpful in a funny way was that they were all feeling like the same way.
mm,
And I even talk to, my students about that when they're learning a very difficult or when they're learning a piece that's new to them and they're struggling. I'll remind them, I'll say, well, when I learn a piece that's new for me, it's not to say that my piece is as easy as your piece. They're different pieces, but I was like, the experience is relatively the same. I'm dealing with this thing that's hard for me. I don't know how to totally do it. I don't know if I can do it. And I'm just flinging myself against this wall over and over until a dent occurs, and then that dent gets bigger, and then eventually the wall goes down. I was like, but that flinging against the wall and trusting this thing that can feel really painful, which is practice, like
mm-hmm.
any art practice. I was like, that's the same. it's like literally the same as a kid struggling with Mary Had a Little Lamb. It's unfamiliar,
Mm-hmm.
feels weird. They don't know
Yeah.
what they're doing, and they don't. It's my point is like that. My doubt and my fear and my all those that swirl of emotions when this all came crashing down. Um, it was relative to what every other person who I felt like couldn't possibly be worried. They were worrying about literally the same things, just maybe the context was different.
Yeah.
And that was helpful actually in a way because I just thought, it's like again, it's not so black and white of like I'm dealing with a thing and they're not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you can replace that with anything, of course. Like now I'll just say that about celebrities. Like, how dare they? Like, you're in your house, you're making money while you sleep. Like, don't talk to me about anything. But
Yeah.
again, it's like you said, like I can't think of anything Trump has said that I've particularly that's resonated with me. But it's the same with these celebrities. But I just don't know. Like I don't know what they're actually dealing. But
Yeah.
like it's easy to be like, well, there's a them and there's a me. And I was doing that even in my own community.
Yeah.
And I don't need to worry about celebrity. If I can make peace with my own community, like that's fine. That's okay for me. I don't
Right.
need to worry about like you know Chris
Right.
Rock,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever, Oprah.
Yeah. That's so funny. That's
I'll
so
leave
funny.
that peacemaking to someone else.
Yeah, I mean, there's this thing about like how we can compare our suffering to others' suffering, and how in so many ways it's really unhelpful. Like I think of course empathy, to be able to recognize that, like, I'm very privileged in the sense that I don't think I'm gonna have to worry about losing my home. I'm
Hmm.
I'm not gonna go hungry. Um, but at the same time, like, I can't I can't feel terrible about whatever I feel like is my own suffering. I'm not going to
Yeah.
like feel guilty because it's not the bottom of the barrel or something.
Right. Of
And
course.
I think
Yeah.
it's really unhelpful at times to think that it prevents me anyway from healing my own suffering.
Yeah.
When I say my suffering isn't worthy because it's not the worst kind.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and I'm sure some of those celebrities are some of the most miserable people in the world.
Totally. They were anyway.
They were anyway. I mean, it's like, well, and now, like, I'm sure, like, they're probably less people are paying attention to them.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
so there maybe they'll have a little bit more of a wake up too.
Well, and what's funny is when Trump acts out and says crazy things, especially now, I think, well, it's this must be very tough in a way. This is like a nightmare for him because no one's really was thinking about him. And it's
Yeah,
funny how he inserted himself into the it was like this was never about you. How come this is about you now?
yeah,
And in a way I feel like that was his own way of being like, I have to. Everything was about me before this. Like this can't not be about me. And it was interesting for a couple of weeks to watch him struggle with how to make it about him,
mm,
and he kept
mm,
kind of like trying to find different villains and none of them were really resonating. I think he finally found traction with this idea of like going back to work is like that's and now anyone, now your local government is the villain. Like but it was interesting to watch him struggle with that for a while because for a minute he was sort of like maybe even accidentally like people were gonna be united for 5 seconds. Everyone was thinking the same thing, like the blizzard in New York where the
mm,
subway shut down. Everyone for like a second was possibly thinking the same thing, but that's not fun for him, and that's also not like that doesn't give us charge. That doesn't give sort of an egoic sort of like charge. And so it was
yeah,
just wild to watch over the course of a couple of weeks for him to sort of find his footing. Like, oh, okay, all right, now it's about me again. Perfect. Now everyone's mad at me or not mad at me, and I have this sort of like league of an army that I can do like that. It was just, but it wasn't like that at first, which I thought was
hmm,
really interesting. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
I don't
true.
know.
It's funny we didn't really talk much about music.
I
I guess in a
know.
way, I guess in a way we did, right? Um, so one of the things I always ask people is if you can think. I'm sure you've probably got a lot of examples of this. Is if you can think of a musician, an artist, a piece of music that really transformed the way that you thought about art and music? Kind of one of those sort of aha moments where like you heard it and you could never go back. I don't know if that was John Cage or if it was something else, but something that was like that turning point.
You know, it's funny. I think if I'm really honest, the first person I thought of when you said that was actually like an artist like Lamont Young,
Mm.
who is like one of the first extreme minimalists who I've never had a conversation with him. I have friends who are very close with him professionally. I've watched him perform in a tiny room a couple times. Um, Reading about him in high school um, was really eye-opening for me to read about what he was doing and the extremes of his music, and actually to read about different minimalists in high school when I was not playing that music. I was actually playing like very romantic era music. But to hear about the possibility that was tapped into by John Cage and Young and actually like Glass and Reich was to me like really, really fascinating and really exciting. That to me gave a sense of like, I don't know, possibility.
Yeah.
And through them there was sort of an escalating. I just kept finding points of entry into uh, modern music and contemporary music through, weirdly enough, that first kind of germ of what those minimalists were doing. But still, I was like still interested in like Prokofiev and Copeland and all that stuff. But still, it was really about artists who were like committing to like paths of resistance, like creating sounds that were at once dissonant, or like actually choosing and writing stuff that, like, to me that seemed really incredibly radical
Yeah.
and really brave actually. And I couldn't fathom it at the time. I thought, wow, that's like so amazing, and then I get to play it, like what a treat. I say that all as like that was my first thought, but the truth is, if I'm honest, it was those romantic composers like Chopin or Rachmaninoff, actually, where I was first playing them, and it totally cracked open my idea of what classical music could do and how it could behave
Mm.
and what I could do, and how I might be able to express myself, or yeah,
Yeah.
through it. So when I'm like, even when I'm like talking to like um, students in very modern music settings or contemporary music laboratories, I actually have a good time sort of talking about Rachmaninoff and these other composers who uh, are from like the 19th and early 20th century, but writing in a very hyper expressive tonal realm. And to me, that whipped up the current, which created a riptide that actually brought me into the other stuff, because it was less about, well, it was about the music and it was sounded great and it was really exciting, but it was more about what they were expressing. And I was like, just completely, I just thought it was so powerful, and I was blown away by the idea that classical music could create a platform and a venue and an avenue to express such intensity. And then it became like, that riptide became sort of an escalating thing of like, well, I want more of that intensity. Like, where
Mm-hmm.
can I get that? And I just kept looking into more and more extreme music that was more, just tended to be more and more modern. What's interesting
Yeah.
is that later I just started to like, it started to branch out everywhere. But it was, yeah, it was actually, I have to say, it was like Rachmaninoff. My first thing was Lamont Young, but
Yeah.
then it was actually Rachmaninoff.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that sort of sums up my relationship with music. Period. It's like there's those two things are constantly like fighting and wrestling with each other.
Yeah. Cool.
But
Um,
yeah,
and then, if somebody wants to listen to your work online, where can we find you?
they if they go to adamtendler.com, there are all sorts of ways they can find me on SoundCloud. but that's also at adamtendler.com. There's a YouTube channel, but all those are like easily accessible through um, my own personal website, which is just
Cool.
myname.com. I'm on Spotify, so pretty easy to find. But yeah, that's where and then also I have two books, and they are on Amazon and wherever anywhere else you can buy books. You can actually go to your local bookstore if you want to bypass Amazon and just ask for it, and it can be ordered to anywhere.
Yeah, there's this site
Um,
that I found recently. Oh God, is it Bookish? I think it's Bookish, where you
oh
can
yeah.
order new books and kind of indirectly support your local bookstore.
Oh cool.
It's or is it Bookshop? Yeah, it's Bookshop, bookshop.org.
Cool.
So it's kind of like, in a way, it's like Amazon's affiliate program, but it's like you put your zip code in and find a bookstore you want to support. You buy from Bookshop, and they kick back to your local bookstore.
Oh wow.
So it's a really
That's
great way
great.
to bypass Amazon and support local.
And it's called Bookshop.
Bookshop.org. Yeah, yeah,
Oh cool.
it's a good one.
Yeah. No, this was nice to talk about. I feel
Yeah.
like somehow I brought up Trump's name and he completely ruined a point that I was like going for. And that's also like the greatest metaphor because this whole time I've been thinking like, what was I trying to say?
Uh huh.
And I actually can't think of it. So you'll probably get a feverish text later where I'm like, here's what I was trying to say about that.
I'll
But
put it in the podcast description.
yeah, put it in the podcast description. But yeah, that's I don't know. It's been nice to sort of riff with you
Yeah.
about all of this because it does all change every day. It changes with the weather, and
Yeah.
I think we're all just sort of navigating it together. And yeah, and
Cool.
we have to forgive ourselves constantly. I think is
Hmm.
is sort of the thing. If we're not being productive all the time, I think that's totally okay. If we're feeling super inspired, that's also great. That's okay.
Hmm.
I just think it's like a kaleidoscope, and that's yeah. And I think it'll continue to be because
Yeah.
yeah, I just think it will continue to be.
It will. It will. Cool. Well, thank you
It's so
so
nice
much,
to see
Adam.
you.
I know
Yeah.
it's what, been 15 years,
Oh
maybe?
God, it's been a while. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
I'm so
it's
glad to see you out there. I just think what you're doing is so cool. I still need to like properly visit. Your house looks beautiful.
thanks. Yeah. Well, and you can actually, so Echo Mono, you can go to the website and see kind of the work that we show at the gallery too. So everything's
Oh, how
online,
great.
and so that would be
Cool.
fun.
It'll be really nice once we all just start to trickle back into, you know, our our thing. And
Yeah.
like you were saying, there's two people usually at a time in the gallery, and it's funny as I've been seeing like people talking about, well, in the future we're only going to have concerts that have 10 people in the audience, and I'm like, well, I've been pioneering that for I've been pioneering that for 10 years, 20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
That I can do.
That's funny. That's funny.
Oh man. Well, take
Cool.
care.
Yeah. Thank you.